Night of the Sentinels is a must-watch episode of X-Men the Animated Series, and here's why. The episode sets the pieces on the board for the rest of the series, and features the first appearances in the series of Sabretooth, Jubilee, who acts as a bit of an audience cipher, Rogue and Storm, Gambit, Cyclops, Beast, Morph, Robert Kelly, Henry Gyrick, Magneto, and Domino, and sort of Easter egg appearances, Jean Grey and Professor X, and Wolverine. And it also shows the Danger Room for the first time, as well as the Blackbird jet. The story involves the Mutant Control Agency, which has been duping mutants into revealing who they really are, and therefore exposing them to being tracked and hunted by the Sentinels. IMDb has it at a 7.5 out of 10. So yeah, check it out. The second episode of X-Men the Animated Series, Night of the Sentinels Part 2, is actually much more of a bummer than the first episode. If you don't want spoilers about what happens in this episode, you may want to skip this video or just jump ahead. So in Night of the Sentinels Part 2, a team led by Cyclops is tasked by Professor X to raid the headquarters of the Mutant Control Agency, and in doing so, they are forced to engage with Sentinels, and the Sentinels manage to capture Beast on the way out after the team successfully destroys, or they think at least that they successfully destroyed the records that the MCA was keeping on mutants for tracking purposes. And worst of all, apparently, Morph is killed by the Sentinels, and the team is forced to depart without him. So the episode sort of surrounds the aftermath, and then sort of tying up the loose ends from the first episode, which include ultimately rescuing Jubilee and introducing Trask, who is the scientist behind the Sentinel program. Overall, I would say the episode is worth watching. It's mainly essential viewing because of what happens to the character I mentioned earlier. I recommend that you don't be like me when the show originally aired, and make sure you watch this episode so that stuff that happens later makes more sense. It's rated 7.7 on IMDb, and does a lot to further establish and develop the characters that were introduced in the first episode. I would still consider this to be a must-watch episode, if for no other reason than what happens to the character that I mentioned. If Enter Magneto isn't one of the most important episodes of X-Men the Animated Series, it's definitely one of the coolest. But it's actually probably also one of the most important. Enter Magneto primarily hangs his hat on exploring the relationship between two sets of characters, Magneto and Professor X, and Wolverine and Sabretooth. Enter Magneto establishes Magneto's ethos and backstory, which includes his relationship with Professor X. The episode is bookended by two really memorable action sequences. It opens with a really cool sequence, or set piece, of Magneto trying to jailbreak Beast from where he's being held. It also has a couple of really rad Wolverine moments, and you also get Beast quoting Shakespeare in Trial. It's got a 7.6 out of 10 on IMDb right now, and I would tell people not to skip it. I'm drinking coffee because in this episode I learned that the X-Men are apparently big fans of it. They managed to take not one, but two coffee breaks in the same episode. Deadly Reunions is an interesting episode. It could easily be a part 2 to Enter Magneto. Both pairs of characters whose relationships are explored in that episode see themselves facing off in this one. Professor X and Magneto, and Wolverine and Sabretooth. The episode's a personal favorite of mine. There's a lot of cool little elements to it. You get to see Professor X demonstrate his powers, both to be used as therapy, like he does with Sabretooth early on, and as a weapon, like he does against Magneto, bringing forth debilitating flashbacks and traumas. There are some cool Easter eggs in this episode, including references to characters like Maverick. A good part of the episode takes place in a chemical plant that Magneto attacks to try to call out Xavier. During that battle, there are a couple of pretty interesting moments, like when Rogue tries to resuscitate Cyclops and ends up absorbing his powers and doesn't know how to control them. It's sort of an iconic moment in the series, but at least you got to try out some new shades. And then also, the writers use it as an opportunity to explore Storm's, or demonstrate Storm's claustrophobia. IMDb gives it a 7.5 out of 10. All in all, it's a pretty satisfying episode. I would definitely recommend it. I wouldn't call episode 5 Captive Hearts absolutely essential, must watch, but that doesn't mean that you should necessarily skip it either. The episode establishes a couple of key character development points, as well as introduces some characters that will pop up and be relevant again later in the series. It establishes and or reinforces Wolverine's interest in Jean, and the tension that it creates on the team. It introduces the Morlocks, who are kind of just monsters of the week in this episode, more or less, but again, like I mentioned, they do come up later in the series. Storm's claustrophobia is once again a topic, and in the end, she proves that she can overcome it to be a very valuable member of the team. Not sure if that's medically accurate, but also get to see Scott and Jean in a more normal-looking circumstance where they're going on a date together. Gambit and Rogue go swimming, I guess. And, maybe most importantly, it is the source of the famous Wolverine meme. It's got a 7.2 on IMDb. Again, maybe not the most important episode in the world, but also not something I would go out of my way to miss. Cold Vengeance isn't necessarily a bad episode, but if you're looking for one to skip, or if you don't want to necessarily watch all of X-Men the Animated Series, it's one that you can probably get around to later, or just watch the recap of on the next episode without feeling like you missed much. The story surrounds what happens to Wolverine after he leaves the X-Mansion on the previous episode. He's up in Canada on some soul-searching adventure. There he encounters some fishermen, and there's a subplot involving his interaction with the village that they're from, and he does eventually cross paths with Sabretooth. Meanwhile, Storm, Gambit, and Jubilee are sent to the fictional island nation of Genosha because Gambit heard that they treat mutants pretty well there. They're going undercover, but even though Storm and Jubilee dress down and arguably appear more like everyday humans, Gambit wears what he always wears, down to his metal boots. The results are what you might expect. It's rated on IMDb as 7.5. And again, if you're not looking to watch all the episodes, this is one that you're not going to regret catching later, when you can go, oh, so Wolverine went fishing. I would say that you could call it iconic. Slave Island is the 7th episode of X-Men the Animated Series. It introduces the explosive mutant power suppression collars that you sometimes see throughout the show, as well as Cable and Master Mold, and Cameron Hodge. You also have other cameos like Sunfire, Mystique, North Star, and Aurora from Alpha Flight. It also introduces Blob. Basically, the episode follows Gambit, Jubilee, and Storm from being captives at the beginning, where they're in this work camp that Guy and Trask put together to try to build more Sentinels, using mutants to do it, to escaping. Storm does something that makes her look pretty dumb at the beginning, and ends up in pretty much the last place that someone with claustrophobia would want to. All in all, just sort of an important episode, I would say, because it shows the lengths Guy, Rick, and friends are willing to go to accomplish what they want to accomplish. IMDb has it at 7.5, and I would definitely call it a must-watch. I'd say episode 8 of X-Men the Animated Series, The Unstoppable Juggernaut, is kind of a fun palate cleanser. The team comes back on the Blackbird jet after having rescued Gambit, Jubilee, and Storm from Genosha. The previous episode leaves off on a cliffhanger where they arrive and find that the X-Mansion has been demolished. So at the beginning, it's kind of like a mystery. They land the jet and then they're like checking everything out. And the Professor's nowhere to be seen, and Wolverine storms off. Cyclops then sends Jubilee, Storm, and Rogue to look for Wolverine. Jubilee finds Wolverine first, but then they find this guy named Colossus working construction. And first they think that he's the guy who wrecked the mansion because he's this huge dude and he's around, I guess. But, as you may have guessed from the title, he's not the dude, he's not the guy. Eventually he meets Rogue and Storm, and Rogue seems to really like Colossus. But, oh hey, that's right, Beast is in the show, everyone. Beast is still in the show. It's been a few episodes, I think since episode 2, but he's hanging around, literally, in this prison, in this jail, waiting for his day in court. The team crosses paths with Juggernaut, who is the guy who demolished the mansion. And they have a big throwdown with him. You get to catch glimpses into who the Juggernaut really is in this fight. Rogue tries to absorb his powers. Ultimately, Jean kind of dismantles him psychically and confuses him psychically, so he'll leave. A lot of good stuff in this episode. If you're binging the show, no reason to skip it at all. Colossus and Juggernaut are not lightweights in X lore. IMDb has it at 7.6. I tried to watch it, but I probably wouldn't put it at the absolute most important episode in the series. I would call X-Men Episode 9, titled The Cure, a must-watch episode of X-Men the Animated Series. It has the first appearance and first speaking appearance of Apocalypse in the series, and the first official introduction to Mystique, complete with speaking role. It introduces Avalanche and Pyro, as well as Warren Worthington, aka Angel, aka Archangel. It gives you a window into Rogue's mind. It intersects with the Professor X story that's been building for a couple of episodes leading into this one. The story, as the title suggests, is about a cure for mutant powers and abilities, which of course would have the interest of someone like Rogue. His powers are arguably as much of a drawback as they are a benefit. A couple of cool Gambit and Rogue moments. It's got 7.6 on IMDb. Definitely check it out. So episode 10, Come the Apocalypse, basically acts as a way to tie up the loose ends from episode 9, The Cure, and simultaneously as a demonstration of the threat that Apocalypse is going to pose. Apocalypse is a very noteworthy and important character in X-Men the Animated Series and X-Men in general. If you're interested in Apocalypse and you want to soak up everything there is to know about the character, this is basically a must-watch. It also goes into the origin of Apocalypse's Horsemen, and it is the source material for this meme. IMDb has it at a 7.9. I wouldn't consider it a top-shelf episode, but it's far from the worst. Days of Future Past Part 1 is based on an X-Men storyline that some people still consider to be among the best, if not the best ever. For that reason, I guess I would have to default to saying that it is a must-watch episode. That said, these days, it probably doesn't feel as fresh as it used to, and that's in part because it is so influential. If you're watching it for the first time, it probably will feel pretty familiar, especially if you've seen any of the Terminator movies and things like that. Basically, in short, the episode follows Bishop after he travels back in time to prevent an assassination. It's a bit of a mystery. The episode introduces him and Forge. IMDb has it at an 8.5 out of 10. I would tell most people to watch it if they're watching X-Men the Animated Series. Episode 12, Days of Future Past, Part 2, is the penultimate episode of Season 1 of X-Men the Animated Series. I'd say this one is all about the ending. There's plenty of action along the way, but I would definitely pick Days of Future Past, Part 1 over it. Most of it takes place in 90s era X-Men like the rest of the series. You have return appearances from the likes of Pyro and Avalanche and Blob. One question the episode dives into is whether or not Gambit can be trusted. IMDb has it at an 8.5 out of 10, like Part 1. I would consider it a must-watch because it is a two-parter. Part of Part 1, it tells the full story and ends in an interesting cliffhanger. X-Men the Animated Series Episode 13, titled The Final Decision, is one of those cathartic, bombastic season finales that gives everyone a nice sense of closure and new beginnings, as well as shoring up some of the main points of conflict from the first season. This episode kind of has it all. The return of Magneto, Master Mold going sentient, Senator Kelly being kidnapped, Senator Kelly coming around, Cyclops proposing to Jean, Rogue and Gambit having a moment, Beast finally getting out of jail, Professor X and Magneto working together, Wolverine losing a shirt, and Professor X having one of those killer action movie finales, flying TNT into Master Mold, and a spooky cliffhanger. It's got an 8.2 on IMDb, and I would consider it a must-watch episode.